Everyone has a story to tell. Welcome to DingoTalk, where we explore the experiences that make us who we are. Here's your host, Carlo Guadagnino.
What's going on, Chuckleheads? I am Carlo Guadagnino. This is DingoTalk. My guest this week, Joe Smeltzer of Nittany Lions Now.
Nittany Sports Now, yep.
Nittany Sports Now. Waynesburg graduate of class of 20, Pittsburgh kid, born and raised. From what I can gather, big Pirates guy, big Steelers guy, big Penguin guy, and then obviously a Penn State guy. First and foremost, how does a guy from West Allegheny, out there near the airport, for those of you in the Pittsburgh area, how does a guy from West Allegheny find his way? And I think I know the answer, but I'm going to let you tell it. How does a guy find his way to Waynesburg?
Well, Carlo, first off, thanks for having me on. So I found my way to Waynesburg. It's probably similar to a lot of other guys you talk to. I know you've talked to some Waynesburg guys. Laney Terry's sports announcing camp is probably the single biggest recruiting tool that the Department of Communication has for Waynesburg. I went there. I think how it started was I worked with West Allegheny's baseball team. I did film, I did stats. Now, one of our games, Laney was announcing, it was a playoff game, and he said something to me about going to the camp, and I thought, okay, and then eventually I end up registering for the camp. I go, and I didn't really like the campus too much at first. I thought I was there in the summer, which probably didn't help because there was no students, but I thought, okay, this is small, this is kind of boring, not a lot to do. And then I don't really know why my mind changed on the whole thing, but one day it just clicked, like, hey, Waynesburg's where I want to be. I want to give it a shot. And then it ended up being between Waynesburg and St. Bonaventure. St. Bonaventure, also a very good Department of Communication, but it wasn't too hard of a decision. In the end, I ended up going to Waynesburg. I knew people that were already at Waynesburg, so that helped too. And then obviously I met a lot of people there. Yeah, but really the number one reason it happened was because of Laney in that camp. So,
well, and that it's a running theme with the Yellow Jackets from that Department of Communications at Waynesburg. There's the camp, and then they end up following up with going to the school. Was your love always going to be as a writer, or did you originally want to be a on-camera personality? Did you want to get behind the camera, be a director, be an editor? Where was your first love, and why did you end up into the sports writing side of things?
Yeah, so my first love was probably sports announcing, and this is probably going back to when I was in early middle school. I was 12, 13, 14. I really wanted to be a broadcaster. But then when I got later in the high school, I started a sports blog. I got really into that. I took a creative writing class my junior year of high school, and that was when I discovered that I had a bit of a talent for it. And then obviously I've loved sports for a long time, so writing kind of blended something I did fairly well with something I enjoyed doing. So I guess a talent and a hobby, if that makes sense. So by the time I got to Waynesburg, I knew I was going to be on the writing side, and I was still as involved in broadcasting as I could have been. I announced our sporting events, mainly football, basketball, some baseball games, but I was heavily involved in our student newspaper, and really from day one, I was more of an emphasis towards the writing side of it in print. So
now it's interesting because I feel like a lot of people, especially 2016, even go back 2010, 2011, 2012, people coming into school, everybody either wanted to be in front of a camera or behind a camera. And I feel like the writing side of sports, the true sports fan, and the good writers and some bad writers have all found their own way of keeping print alive, basically. Because I mean, there's a lot of people that do this, that do a blog as opposed to doing a podcast, because they feel that they can express themselves a little bit more through their writing. Is that something that you take into account as a writer? Are you going out there with this is how I talk, this is how I feel, and I hope that message comes across, or do you not care if the message comes across because you're confident in your writing?
I'm pretty confident in my writing, but I feel that writing's probably the best way that I use to express myself. I don't really know what it is. Maybe it's because you have more time to think about what you want to say when you write and think, okay, how does this make sense? Am I conveying what I want to convey? Because when you're talking, you have, especially during play-by-play, if you don't say something clear, and that's Laney's two biggest words, clear and concise. If you don't get that right away, then it's too late. You just have to move on. But writing, if you write something wrong the first time, and obviously there's exceptions with deadlines, but in most cases, if you get something wrong the first time, you can look back at it, change it, and then better convey it. So I think that helps. But mainly, I would say that I'm just pretty confident in my skills, and I think I'm able to express myself probably more or less the same way, both in talking and when I write.
Well, and Waynesburg's communications department, we've talked about, we've had many guests on from your department, classmates and people before you. I know you guys do see at Bethany, we do it's you have your senior project, and then the big thing for us is comprehensive exams. But for you guys, it's more of the senior project is the big ticket, correct? What was your senior project?
So you're talking about practicum?
Yeah. Maybe I think that's where the disconnect is that I think of it as the final project.
Yeah, so I don't really have a big story with that. So what happened was my senior year, so for multiple reasons, our paper, the Yellow Jacket, went through a big shift between my junior and senior year. We for my first 3 years, we were a weekly publication and we were 32 pages.
Yeah.
My senior year, we switched to bi-weekly print and cut the paper in half to 16 pages. So that meant that online for the whole paper was going to become much more of an emphasis. And Professor Richard Krause, who taught our practicum class, felt that my role with the paper, I was a sports web editor. He thought that was so different and so drastic and enough to handle that he let me use that kind of as my big project. So I don't know if I wish I would have done something else or not looking back on it, but it was a big challenge and I felt I got a lot out of it. So
one, and I'm glad that we led into your senior year, because I understand you, like so many people that graduated out of the high school graduating class of 2016, 4 years later, here we go, we're getting ready to graduate, go out into the real world, and nope, go home. So let's talk about, how did COVID affect your situation with ending school and potential jobs, or was the job already lined up after school?
Yeah, well, obviously, like everybody else, COVID was awful for me. Probably, I wasn't even thinking too much about jobs at the time. Maybe I should have been more, I don't know, but I was more upset about like not seeing my friends, just the whole social aspect, and also the fear of like, when's everything going to be right again in the world. So it was more that I was really, my job was kind of dependent on whenever sports came back. So through how it went was through March, when we got sent home, to the end of what would have been the traditional school year, us in the sports department, we just kind of made everything centered around COVID. It's like, how's this team affected by it? How's that team? And that's how we kind of went throughout the rest of my year. I probably should have been better at being an editor in that time, but I was in such a rough mental state, as a lot of people were, that I don't know if I could have done my job to the best of my ability, but luckily I was already kind of in with the Observer Reporter, which I still write for. I was a stringer for them, which, if you don't know, a stringer is someone paid on a per piece basis. So it's like, you cover this game, get however much for it. So I was already in with them when sports came back, which I think the first sporting event I did during COVID was a high school football game at Trinity. I kind of got into a routine with covering sporting events with the OR, and I kind of grinded my way through. through about almost 2 years. I worked with the OR. I worked at Target, which I still do as well to make some money. And then in October, late October, maybe early November of 2021, COVID was a lot smoothed over by then. Fans were coming back, writers were coming back to sporting events, and I got hired to cover Penn State football. So
there was a lot to unpack there. One thing that I really noticed that you said, and if you're not comfortable talking about it, please, tell me to go pound salt. The mental health side of COVID, which I know we're now starting to talk about it, and we're starting to talk about those effects. You pointed out clearly that you were in such, just from basically being told you're in a room now. This is where you go. You're not allowed to leave. You're not allowed to do anything. The mental stress and the mental strain, I guess, would be more than stress, that weighed on you, affected not only what you said was a hobby originally that you also turned into a job. How did you work your way through that? Did you go talk to someone? How did you get yourself out of that?
Yeah, and that's a good question. I think once we went into that yellow phase in Pennsylvania, then it started to get better, because then at least you were seeing something, right? I had a weekend at my friend's house, got to see some people, so that was fun just to feel normal. And then as things kind of progressed through the summer, because the summer of 2020 was actually pretty good for me from a mental standpoint. I think by June I was probably okay, and then obviously the late fall and winter of 2020 was pretty bad, but by that point we had already kind of knew what to expect with that, so I was okay then too. So I think it was just a matter of being able to see people again and being able to have some semblance of a normal life, because March and April of 2020, which was when my senior year was wrapping up, we had none of that. So I guess time kind of heals all wounds, and also just getting used to dealing with the pandemic life, it kind of got easier as it went along as well. So
we're going to turn this a little bit, make it a little more, bring it upbeat now from that. If I was sitting down interviewing your parents right now, how would they describe you?
Let's see. My dad would probably describe me as disorganized. And my mom would probably describe me as, I guess, I don't know, compassionate and hardworking and all that. And my dad would describe me that way too. But my dad would probably have more of the I guess, snarky response. Yeah, just kind of like the typical things a parent would say about their son, I guess. They would just kind of point out what they think I do well, how I treat people, and my work ethic probably.
And then since we asked about your parents, and I don't want to put any pressure on you, but I'm guessing they're going to watch, so maybe think about this next answer.
Sure.
The three most influential people in your life and why?
Oh boy. That is hard.
I got you a little bit there. See,
yeah,
I'm trying these curveballs now. It's a new thing. I'm trying to see the real answers come.
So did it have to be in a specific order?
No.
So I'll go probably my parents would definitely be two of them. And then the third one, honestly, probably my grandfather, who's sadly no longer with us. But he was the guy, I think a lot of my love of sports and sports history kind of came from my grandpa. It's funny because my mom always tells me back when I was probably 2, 3, 4, for whatever reason, I just didn't like my grandpa, and I would yell at him every time he tried to talk. I don't know why, but eventually, I discovered that he really liked sports history. So, because I had a love of sports history going back to my toddler years. So once I found out my grandpa liked that too, we kind of bonded over that, and he was obviously able to be around, in some cases present for the events that for me were just covered in books and on highlight reels. Definitely keeping it in the family. I'd probably say my parents and then my grandpa were the top three.
Well, and let's jump right back into the sports side of things. So we're now at Penn State. You've been there for 2 years? A year.
A year and a few weeks.
Okay.
So I just wrapped up my first full regular season with them.
First question, because Penn State fans will crucify me if I don't ask. How do we feel now a year into James Franklin's big extension and the money that came behind that? Comfortable, or we that's still the guy, we're riding with him?
Oh, absolutely. I think this year for Penn State was probably more about picking up the pieces than anything else, because the last 2 years were a mess. The COVID season was horrible both on and off the field for Penn State. First losing season they had since 2003. First 0-5 start ever happened in that year. And then 2021 started out great, 5-0, ranked in the top 5, and then Penn State lost 6 of its last 8 games. So this season, obviously the big criticism of James Franklin is that he can't beat Michigan, can't beat Ohio State, in some cases can't beat Michigan State. And yeah, this year Penn State lost to Michigan and Ohio State, but realistically, the biggest thing for this year was for Penn State to get back to being a quality, powerful football program again. And I think by going 10-2, Penn State did that. And year 1 of 10 of Franklin's extension was a success, And then going into next year, Penn State had a great recruiting class. Those guys were freshmen this year. Next year, they'll be sophomores and even more experienced. But yeah, I think definitely 2 thumbs up for Penn State football this season. And James Franklin's still going to have his critics, but the guy's done a pretty good job at Penn State. I think in the grand scheme of things, 4 10-win seasons in 7 years is pretty good.
Well, and this year specifically, it seemed that the defense would click on all cylinders, and the offense, almost similar to what we see a little bit as black and gold fans. The defense is there at the beginning of the game. They're hyped. They're doing a bunch of things, and the offense just isn't there. What started to put things that you're there every week? When did it really start to look like this team was going to keep putting the pieces together?
Oh, I think probably the Minnesota game, which was the week after Penn State got embarrassed by Michigan 41-17 in Ann Arbor, and the game wasn't even as close as that scoreline would indicate. But against Minnesota, it just felt like a different team, especially defensively, because Minnesota has a pretty good running back in Muhammad Ibrahim, and Penn State struggled mightily against Michigan's rushing attack the week before, but Penn State contained Ibrahim pretty well. Ibrahim got over 100 yards in that game, but that was only because he had a lot of carries. I think he only averaged a little over 3 yards a carry. But just the defense just looked so different and so much better against Minnesota. And then for the first 3 quarters against Ohio State, it looked pretty good too. And then fast forward to next week, it broke the school tackle for loss record against Indiana. Shut out Maryland the week after that, dominated Rutgers, and then looked pretty good against Michigan State this past week as well. So I think, I don't really know what it was specifically, but after that Michigan game, the team really started to play great football. And aside from a loss to Ohio State, which Penn State actually played pretty well against Ohio State, other than that, they went undefeated and blew out everybody they played.
Now, as a Penn State guy, the alignment of the conference has to be talked about. I mean, you have 3 dominant teams on one side that are, and I think the argument has been made, Michigan and Ohio State are here. Penn State's that next. They're not quite at that right now, but they're still above the bottom of the Big Ten. Yeah. And then you go over to that other side, and I think it's Iowa and Wisconsin. Is that the 2 that really come out of there a lot of most of the time?
Purdue actually won the conference this year, but predominantly it's Wisconsin, and then I think Iowa's won the West twice since it's been the Big Ten, or since the divisions have been aligned. So, and
then what's the change with UCLA and USC coming in? Does one go to each? How do they break that up? And what do you see for USC and UCLA? Because it's not going to be 6 games will be played in the sunny parts of Southern California, but going to Michigan, going to Ohio State, going to Pennsylvania in the middle of November is probably not something they want to be doing. So how do you see that breaking down next year?
Yeah, I'm not sure where, if they haven't decided the division alignments post 2023 yet, which is when USC and UCLA will be coming in. I still don't really know how I feel about it, Carlo, to tell you the truth. USC, I think for football, they're a power in football. They are already, Riley resurrected that program in 1 year, and things are only going to get better for USC. But UCLA has a good football program, but nobody shows up. So the Big Ten's probably going to be looking at half-empty stadiums because I don't think UCLA and Illinois is going to inspire any more people to go to those games.
I don't imagine so.
No, so I think this was made for football, and football is the biggest reason. So just talking about from a football standpoint, I love the possibility of USC playing Penn State and Beaver Stadium in a whiteout game. USC and Michigan would be a great draw as well, Ohio State. That's a big advantage, but honestly, for football, the more I think about it, I don't really know what UCLA will add to the conference.
No, but UCLA does add a dynamic side on the basketball side of things.
Oh, for sure. And yeah, there's definitely Penn State basketball, I think, is on the way up. So those will create some interesting matchups. It'd be great to watch Micah Shrewsbury's team play in Pauley Pavilion for one. But UCLA is a great athletic program. And I don't think they add too much from a football standpoint, but talking about all sports, UCLA baseball is obviously a traditional power, as is USC. UCLA softball is very good. Soccer, I think, is pretty good. So both of these programs are really well-rounded athletically. And the main reason that they're coming in is for money. We all know that. But I think that there's a lot that these teams can add aside from football. And then from a football standpoint, like I said, just having USC come to Beaver Stadium for a whiteout game would be awesome. So I think there's benefits all around, some downsides too. But if nothing else, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Well, and before I jump into the basketball conversation, because I just want to get a quick preview from you what we should expect from this year. But what are you expecting the bowl game to be for Penn State? I don't know have they announced that yet? I don't think
they announced it. This is being recorded Wednesday. They'll announce it Sunday. It's looking increasingly likely that Penn State's going to be playing in the Rose Bowl. The Athletic published an article today, and that's what I was actually working on before I came on. An article about how sources told the Athletic that if Ohio State stays in its current college football playoff ranking, which is number 5, then the Rose Bowl might take Penn State mainly because Ohio State has been there more often than Penn State, and they want to diversify it. Ohio State's been there twice in the past 4 years. Penn State hasn't gone since 2016. And then also, Ohio State didn't really sell well for last year's Rose Bowl game. Out of the 20,000 allotted tickets, the Athletic reported only 13,000 were sold. So that's something to keep in mind. And then there's also a word going around that Ohio State would actually prefer not to play in the Rose Bowl. They prefer to play in the Orange Bowl against Clemson. So I think the momentum, if you asked me yesterday, I probably would have said the Cotton Bowl would be likely for Penn State, but momentum is increasingly picking up that Penn State might be smelling roses.
And you know, it's interesting you bring up that 2016 Rose Bowl game, because I don't think anybody can forget, you know, Saquon was in that. Juju was in that. Juju really had that was kind of a come out game on national television at home for them. And to think now, who would they end up playing if they went to the Rose Bowl?
It depends on how the Pac-12 shakes out, but assuming USC wins and wins the Pac-12 title game Friday, goes to the playoff, then Washington, it looks like, would be the most likely opponent for Penn State.
Now, and as I'm wrapping up this football thoughts in my head, that Pac-12 conference that obviously it looks to be being poached. The schools look to be looking for another. Should we expect more colleges from the Pac-12 to try to jump into the Big Ten? or the ACC or the SEC? And are there any schools that you know of that conversation has really ramped up?
Yeah, there was some talk about I think it was Washington and Oregon coming over to the Big Ten, but that kind of stalled out. Right now, I don't know if there's going to be anything big that happens with a Pac-12 school, at least not for the next few years. But as far as conferences and college football go, anything can happen any day, so it's kind of hard to predict. Like UCLA and USC, that happened out of nowhere. There was no build up to that. It was like, okay, it was reported that they might be going to the Big Ten. Then a few hours later, they're going to the Big Ten. Like no suspense at all. So it just think anything can happen, and I wouldn't be surprised if something wild happened with the Pac-12. I don't know what school would be, but there might be some movement.
And then preview Big Ten basketball for Penn State. How you said that program is on the rise. We've seen that in the last couple of years. They had a tournament run. Then last year, I think they were NIT bound. And then,
they did not make a postseason tournament last year.
Oh, okay. But so what are we expecting from this team this year?
Yeah, so Penn State is 6-2 right now. Losses to Virginia Tech and Clemson. 2 close games. They could be undefeated. Penn State lost to Vol Tech by 2, lost to Clemson in overtime and double OT. But yeah, Micah Shrewsbury, I think, is a very good coach. Did a great job last year getting 14 wins out of a roster he kind of practically threw together overnight with the team transferring. But they got a good thing going. Andrew Funk's a good player. Jalen Pickett's one of the best players in the Big Ten. And I think the key is going to be, Carlo, to close out games. Penn State hasn't done that well yet this year. Eventually, these close games against good teams, they're going to have to start winning. So I think that's going to be a big key in whatever success Penn State's to have this season.
Now, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I have to put you on the spot. Do you want to make a prediction now that this is a tournament team?
I'm going to say yes. I think they sneak in.
All right. So there'll be a bubble team come March, and you think they're going to be get in on a sneaky sneak?
Yeah, I don't think they're going to win the Big Ten. I don't think they'll win the Big Ten tournament, but I think they're one of those teams that could sneak in, maybe as like a 6 to 11, 10 seed. I don't know, but it could change. But my guts tell me they're going to make it for the first time since 2011.
And so moving down the line, I know you're a sports history guy, and this question came to me as you were covering why your grandfather was influential to you. If you could have a beer with any 3 athletes from any time period, any team, any town, wherever you'd like, who would they be and why?
All right, so the obvious one right off the bat is Babe Ruth. Just because he's Babe Ruth, he was insane. He was superhuman, both on the field and in the way he lived his life. Second one, I know he's not an athlete. Would you count Harry Carey there?
I would put Lanny in mine, so.
Yeah, so Harry Carey, basically, because he was a broadcasting version of Babe Ruth, at least in the social scene. And then the third one, I would probably, I'd like to hang out with Ali. I don't know how much Ali, but just the stories that guy would tell, like the humor of all that would just be delightful. So Babe Ruth, Harry Carey, and Muhammad Ali, probably the 3 for me.
And then Joe, what's your biggest pet peeve? Like when you're doing, especially when it comes to writing, what's your biggest pet peeve?
Biggest pet peeve is probably when people refer to Penn State as their instead of its. That's just a very small thing. And then pet peeves are supposed to be small. It's just something I see happen so often in pretty much every article I edit. It just it drives me crazy.
What are your 3 favorite movies of all time? And then we're going to go to what's the 3 sports movies of all time, unless they're all 3 sports movies. Then I don't have to ask that second question.
So I only use one sports movie for favorite general movies. I'll go Rocky, the original one. Goodfellas.
Solid.
And then the third one would probably be Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, solid. 3 solid movies. 3 solid movies. Now, the sports movies, and I'm going to give credit where credit is due. It comes from Donnie Football. I was on Twitter today, and I actually saw he posted it last night, talking about that Sentinels team from the replacements, Shane Falco, who I'm still a little upset with. He cost me a lot of money in that Orange game, or in that Orange Bowl game. So we won't go too far into it. But 3, he got me thinking. I'm talking to a sports guy. 3 favorite sports movies of all time.
Am I allowed to use Rocky again?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll go Rocky. Raging Bull. I love boxing movies. There's something about them that, like, sports movies don't win Oscars. Boxing movies are up for Oscars, and sometimes Rocky won Best Picture. I don't know if there's a set answer for that, but that just kind of seems how it is. And then I'll have to throw a baseball movie in there. Probably The Natural would be my third one.
Like, I'm glad to hear The Natural, because I feel like Field of Dreams gets overused. The one that a lot of people don't talk about that I think is a phenomenal movie, 8 Men Out. The story of the Black Sox, and it's just the way they portray it. It's a phenomenally put together movie.
Yeah, it has a good cast too. Charlie Sheen, a young Charlie Sheen.
Sheen.
John Cusack's in it. I'm sure I'm missing some, but yeah, I love 8 Men Out.
And then more back to just what you do every day. What is an important lesson that you've learned thus far in your career?
Probably not to harp on just small mistakes. And that's a big one for me, because about a year after I left college, I was like looking for all my old articles, and I was kind of like freaking out and getting down on myself because I would see like a typo here, a misquotation there, just little things like that, and it would just drive me crazy. And I was thinking, like, man, why wasn't I a better writer in college? Why aren't I a better writer now? But I think if you harp on small mistakes too much, that'll kill you. And I still struggle with that. I'm not great with it, but I think I've gone better with kind of just when things go wrong, I understand why they went wrong. I write some notes to myself, kind of explaining what happened, and then move on, and then try my best to make sure it doesn't happen again. But you can't change the past. All you can do is focus on the future. And if you think too much about the past, then the things you can't control can end up hindering the things you can control.
I like that answer. I like that answer. If you were giving advice to an 18-year-old, your 18-year-old self, what would it be?
Probably just going back to my college years, probably just enjoy it, because I feel like I had fun in college, but I was also stressed all the time. But now, the further I get removed from it, I kind of appreciate more like what it was and what I had. But it's really hard to, like, as Andy Bernard said in the last episode of The Office, like, I wish there was a way to know you're in the good old days before you leave them. And that's something it's really hard to do in the moment. And I'm sure there's going to be a time 10 years from now when I kind of think about what I was when I was 24 and what I could have done different. But if I were to tell my younger self just going into my college years, I'd probably just say, hey, it's going to be a blast, and never lose sight of how much fun you're having, even though the work can get overwhelming.
And then last question before the question we discussed, why Waynesburg? If you're talking to an 18-year-old college student right now, or somebody going into college, looking to go into college, they want to go into communications, why Waynesburg?
Yeah, so I'm actually gonna steal something from a graduate, and I don't know who the graduate was because my parents heard her speak and I didn't. But the story she gave was she came to Waynesburg. She wanted to be a broadcaster, thought she wanted to be a broadcaster. Then they put her on the air the first week because that's what happens at Waynesburg. It's a small school, so freshmen get their chances. And she discovered that she didn't want to be on the air, but she was able to make that discovery quick enough to where she could switch her point of emphasis in the department to
Mm-hmm.
more behind the scenes and kind of thrive in that department. So, whereas if you go to a place like West Virginia, maybe you don't get on the air for 3 years, and by the time you realize that you don't want to be on the air, you're already a junior and you only have so much time left. And I think that story is really better than anything I could say originally because you're going to be valued right away. You're going to get chances right away at a school like Waynesburg. And if you know that you want to get into broadcasting or writing or whatever it is, if you know that's what you want to do, and you still know that's what you want to do early on, then you'll get your shots early and get chances to improve earlier than you would at a bigger school. And if you discover you don't like it, you can change gears and still be able to pick something else up early on into your college career.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I say. You're going to have your chances right away. And whether you like what you're doing or you don't like what you're doing, if you like it, you can continue with it and have more chances to get better while you're still a freshman and sophomore. If you don't like it, you can switch to something else early.
Well, and I think you reiterated a lot of the, like I said, we've had so many of the department people on the show. A lot graduated with you, like as we've mentioned. And I think that's the general message is that you're gonna get put in the fire, but you're going to be put in the fire to learn if that's where you want to be, or if you want to be behind a camera or, having the headset on and being a TD or whatever that might be. Last question for you. Was there a question that you were expecting me to ask you or wanted me to ask you? And if so, how would you have answered that question?
Yeah, so I was wondering if you were going to ask what the biggest mistake I've made in journalism is. And I do have an answer for that. It's so 20 the spring of my junior year, I did an article on I think it was a political story.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I don't know what the exact thing was, but I talked to a professor we have, a pretty renowned professor, and I talked to another professor. And I, being that it's such a touchy subject, I wasn't comfortable asking either one what their political affiliation was. So I decided to ask people who knew the two and find out secondhand. That was a mistake.
Okay.
The article runs a few days. I think the day after our paper hits the stands Thursday. A professor who I wrote in the article was affiliated with this party emailed our editor and basically said I never told him this. It wasn't an angry email. In fact, he never even denied that was his affiliation. He just basically he didn't want me to put that out there when he didn't feel it was necessary for the story. And I sent him an apology email. He wrote back. He actually ran into me in the bookstore the next day. He was a lot more gracious about it than other people would have been. So
Mm-hmm.
I got off easy. But that was just a lesson I learned that if you have a question that's important and that you're going to use, you should ask the person and confirm with them because unideal circumstances can happen if you don't. So. And one thing I have to ask, what does it mean to be a chucklehead? Like how did that come about?
All right. So at Bethany, we had a bar and it was called Bubba's. Well, for a lot of people, they had Bubba. Bubba was a very large man. He's a very loud man, and he could put back gin like nobody else. Well, the guy that ran the bar when I was there was Chuck. Chuck passed away in 2017, I believe. I think he passed away in 2017. When I started as a writer, when I started in comm, this guy didn't miss a beat. Like if I made a comment the wrong way, I'd go into the bar after a radio broadcast that was only broadcasted in Bethany. And he would go, so you said the Pirates have, it's been 21 years. It hasn't been 21 years. It's been 20. If they would have lost this year, it would have been 21. Maybe you should correct yourself before. But he did it in such a way. And then, there'd be a drink in front of me and he'd go, now let's talk about this week for Bethany sports. So my way of kind of honoring him, and I've said it all. I mean, I was on the air back in Bethany in 2014, and I used to sign off that way as we'll catch you next week, Chuckleheads. And it just kind of became my thing. It's a way to honor him. I think that all of us, the other side of that is I think all of us need to laugh at ourselves. So I feel when I call you a chucklehead, or I call everybody that watches this a chucklehead, and you hear it, it makes you kind of go, oh, that's a little goofy. Why would you say that? So thank you for asking that. I appreciate that.
No problem. I was wondering that. So.
You see, I normally get the what is DingoTalk, and then I have to do the whole explanation of my last name, and then I talk a lot, and so
I could kind of figure that out just based on your last name. I kind of put that together. But...
Yeah, you just move a couple letters, and we're there.
Yep.
Well, I want to say thank you very much for taking time. Sorry, this thing keeps moving on me, and I'm trying to keep it steady. Thank you very much, Joe, for taking time to sit down and talk with us here on DingoTalk. For those of you at home, you might notice I have a new shelf behind me. Every once in a while, there's going to be new stuff on the shelf. My girlfriend put a Santa Claus there. So we're festive for this month of December. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon, pretty much anywhere you can find a podcast, we're there. iHeartRadio. Then on social media, it's Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, and Instagram. The only one that's different is DingoTalk. On Instagram, it's Dingo_talk. If you type DingoTalk in, you're going to find a bunch of wild dogs and a very nice Australian man. He loves the wild dingoes. That's not me. You won't find Joe there. Donnie won't be. Nobody that was on DingoTalk will be on that specific channel. That's specifically just dogs. Great guy, though. Joe, thank you. I look forward to watching Penn State basketball this year. I'm hoping to hear about this Rose Bowl by the time this airs. We'll probably know. We're here every Thursday at 10 a.m. Chuckleheads, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for checking out this episode of DingoTalk. Don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. For more info and to contact the show, you can find us on Twitter @DingoTalk.